Ah, let me take you back to a time hidden in the depths of history, a time shrouded in mist, a turning point where one era ended and another began, a moment when the paths of East and West diverged, and the centuries-old grandeur of an empire took a new direction. While Rome's legacy brought collapse and chaos to the West, a very different story was unfolding in the East. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled under barbarian invasions, civil wars, and destruction, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call Byzantium, was fighting to hold on to its former glory. But like all empires, Byzantium too would eventually have to face the inevitable winds of change. In this story, I'll take you through the making of an empire, the grand ambitions of Justinian, and the reasons why the East and West became two separate worlds. So come with me on this journey through time. Let me take you back to a world buried in the sands of time. As the echoes of a fallen empire still linger, we'll witness the rise of a new legacy from its ashes. Once a unified force stretching from west to east, the mighty Roman Empire had now split into two very different destinies. The West had succumbed to the cold, merciless grip of collapse, while the East struggled to survive, forging a new identity in the process. But this separation didn't happen overnight. It was the inevitable result of a slow, deep-rooted transformation that had been brewing for years. The Western Roman Empire, a name that once shook the world with the thunder of its legions, was now little more than a shadow of its former self. Centuries of war, internal conflict, betrayals, and corrupt rulers had left it a sick and dying giant. The first signs of its downfall came when the empire could no longer defend its own borders. Germanic tribes, the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, all of them saw Rome's weakness and moved in to take their share. The once mighty legions were no longer disciplined Roman soldiers, but rather mercenaries, foreigners wielding the same swords that had once been used to conquer their ancestors. But the biggest blow came in 410 AD, when the Visigoth king Alaric marched on Rome. Few believed the eternal city could actually fall, and yet it did. Alaric and his men stormed through its gates, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Ancient monuments were looted, palaces burned, and the streets were filled with fear and hunger. That day, it became clear the fall of the Western Roman Empire was inevitable. It didn't collapse in a single moment, but this event was a glaring sign that the empire was on its deathbed. By 476 AD, the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the barbarian king Odoacer, marking the official end of Western Rome. But what about the East? How did it manage to survive the chaos? The Eastern Roman Empire, known today as Byzantium, remained standing despite the West's destruction. The key to its survival lay in its strong and centralized administration. Constantinople's mighty walls served as an almost impenetrable fortress against invaders, and its access to rich trade routes kept its economy thriving. While the West clung desperately to old Roman traditions, the East was more flexible, adapting its policies to stay ahead. Its emperors strengthened the bureaucracy, refined their military strategies, and carefully managed their resources. These efforts kept the empire alive. But here's the thing. Although the East survived, it was slowly becoming something entirely different from Rome. Greek influence had started to overshadow Roman traditions, and Latin was gradually being replaced by Greek as the empire's main language. Over time, Byzantium moved further away from the classical Roman identity and shaped a new one. But what did this transformation mean for the future? Would it drive an even deeper wedge between East and West? And what kind of consequences would this shift bring? To answer these questions, we must continue our journey. My friends, you remember, don't you? We witnessed the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the once mighty empire crumbling under the weight of barbarian invasions and internal struggles. But don't be mistaken. Rome didn't vanish completely. No. It lived on, thriving behind strong walls in a wealthy and magnificent city, Constantinople. While Rome's legacy was fading in the West, the Eastern Roman Empire was redefining itself. It wasn't just the Roman Empire anymore, it was evolving into something new. With the collapse of the West, the East started re-examining the traditions that had kept it standing for so long. The once mighty Roman legions were gone, replaced by Byzantine mercenaries and heavily armed cavalry. Latin, once the language of the court and the people, was slowly disappearing, giving way to Greek. Ideas, art, religion, everything was changing. But did this mean Rome had ceased to exist? Not at all. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call Byzantium, still carried Rome's spirit, but in a new form. Roman laws, old customs, the structure of the state, they still remained. But unlike the old Roman days, emperors no longer had to answer to a senate. Power was concentrated in the hands of a single ruler. And that ruler wasn't just an emperor, he was seen as God's representative on earth. The empire had become more sacred, more divine in nature. Rome's pagan gods had long been forgotten, replaced by the holy figures of Orthodox Christianity. The faces of saints, painted in stunning frescoes, now adorned the walls of palaces and churches. Yes, my friends, the Eastern Roman Empire was now a different world. It hadn't fallen. It had been reborn. And one of the key figures shaping this new world was none other than Justinian. Now, close your eyes and imagine Constantinople for a moment. The first light of dawn glows over the city, making the massive dome of Hagia Sophia shimmer like gold. Street vendors shout as they sell their goods. Bustling markets trade silk and spices. Ships fill the harbor, bringing goods from all across the Mediterranean. Egyptian grain, Syrian textiles, Indian gems. And at the heart of it all, in a magnificent palace, sits one man on his throne, Justinian. Justinian was more than just an emperor. He was a reformer, determined to bring Rome back from the ashes. He consolidated power, rewrote the laws, and purged the court of corruption. But his ambitions went beyond Constantinople. He wanted to restore order across the entire empire. To do this, he launched one of the greatest legal reforms in history. He gathered Rome's old laws, simplified them, and created a new organized system now known as the Justinian Code. This wasn't just a legal reform, it was a way to preserve Rome's legacy. And it would go on to influence European legal systems for centuries. But Justinian didn't stop at laws. He had an even greater dream: to reclaim the lost territories of the Western Roman Empire. With his brilliant general Belisarius leading the way, he launched military campaigns into Italy, North Africa, and even parts of Spain, restoring the lost lands of the West. That was his ultimate goal. But here's the real question, my friends. Would Justinian's grand ambitions truly strengthen Byzantium, or was he setting the empire up for a whole new disaster? That's the real story. My friends. Before we dive into this turning point in history, let's remember Justinian's grand vision: to reunite Rome, to reclaim the shattered, plundered lands of the fallen Western Roman Empire and bring them back under the banner of the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. This wasn't just any ruler's ambition. No, Justinian wasn't an ordinary emperor. He wasn't content with just ruling. He burned with the desire to make Byzantium the true heir of Rome. But could he really pull it off? The man who would bring this dream to life was none other than Justinian's most trusted general, the brilliant and battle-hardened Belisarius. Belisarius. With his sharp mind, unwavering loyalty, and unmatched military skill, he was one of the greatest commanders in Byzantine history. When he set out to reclaim Rome's lost lands, he wasn't just wearing armor. He was carrying the weight of his emperor's ambition on his shoulders. First, he turned his sights to Africa, where the Vandals had taken control of Carthage. Once one of Rome's most prized provinces, it had become a major threat under barbarian rule. But Belisarius, with a force of just 600 soldiers and 600 ships, took on this massive challenge. The Vandals, too busy feasting on the remnants of Rome's legacy, never saw him coming. In 533, with a swift and calculated strike, Carthage fell. This was Justinian's first major victory in the West, a sign that Byzantium was on its way to reclaiming the Mediterranean. But, my friends, Carthage was just the beginning. The real battle lay ahead in Italy, the heart of the old Western Empire. At the time, the region was ruled by the Ostrogoths, and Belisarius's next move was to take them down. When he and his army landed in Sicily in 535, history was being rewritten. The Goths underestimated the Byzantines, thinking they were no match for their rule. Belisarius was a master strategist, more of a cunning fox than a brute force warrior. Instead of charging headfirst into battle, he waged a war of attrition, slowly breaking the Goths down. By 536, Rome itself was once again under Byzantine control. But the Goths weren't about to give up so easily. And that's when the Gothic Wars turned into an absolute nightmare. For every battle won, the Goths regrouped and came back with a vengeance. One leader in particular, King Totila, became a massive thorn in Byzantium's side. The war dragged on for years. Cities were sacked, people suffered, and even Belisarius's genius couldn't bring a quick end to the conflict. In the end, Justinian had to send in reinforcements to crush the Goths once and for all. By 552, most of Italy was back under Byzantine control. But my friends, victory came at a steep price. Italy was in ruins. Rome, the eternal city, had changed hands multiple times, and its people had endured unimaginable hardship. Justinian had reclaimed western lands, but what he got was a broken, exhausted territory, far from the glorious Rome of old. And then came Justinian's final move, a campaign against the Visigoths in southern Spain. In 554, a small Byzantine force managed to capture a portion of the region, but this victory wasn't nearly as significant as the ones in Africa and Italy. So yes, Justinian had succeeded in reclaiming much of the Western Roman lands. But one question still lingered. Were these conquests truly built to last? Or was Byzantium doomed to collapse under the weight of its new burdens? Ah, my friends, history is sometimes shaped by the swing of a sword, and sometimes it simply fades away, slipping through time's relentless grasp. Ah, my friends, battlefields, great conquests, and clashing armies. Sure, they show an emperor's power, but true strength isn't just one with the sword. It's also one with the pen. Because an emperor's legacy isn't just about the lands he conquers. It's about the order he leaves behind. And that, my friends, is Justinian's greatest legacy. The law. Back then, the Byzantine Empire was drowning in the wreckage of old Roman laws. For centuries, shifting governments, emperors, and social structures had turned Roman law into a massive but chaotic mess. Outdated rules, contradictory decisions, and overlapping decrees made the legal system a nightmare. So much so that figuring out who was right in a lawsuit was like solving an impossible puzzle. And in the middle of this chaos, Justinian took on an enormous task: to organize, simplify, and immortalize Roman law. To do this, he gathered the best legal minds of the time, and one man stood out above the rest: Tribonian. A brilliant jurist, sharp thinker, and meticulous reformer, Tribonian got to work under Justinian's orders. He and his team sifted through centuries of Roman law, eliminating contradictions, keeping only the most solid and fair principles, and compiling them into one comprehensive system. And so, the Corpus Juris Civilis was born. This massive legal code was divided into four main parts: Codex Justinianus, Digesta, Institutiones, and Novellae. The Codex was a revised and organized collection of old Roman laws. The Digesta gathered the opinions and rulings of the greatest legal minds, serving as a reference guide. The Institutiones was a beginner's manual for law students, ensuring future generations could continue studying Roman law. And finally, the Novellae contained all the new laws Justinian passed during his reign. Ah, my friends, this wasn't just a legal document. It was a monument that ensured Roman law would live on forever. Because Justinian's laws weren't just used in Byzantium, they spread throughout Europe over the centuries, becoming the foundation of Western legal traditions. In medieval Europe, kings and queens copied these laws, adapting them to their own kingdoms. And even today, traces of Justinian's legal system can still be seen in modern legal codes. But my friends, this great legal reform had another consequence. While it preserved Rome's legacy, it also deepened the divide between East and West. The Western world gradually developed its own local legal traditions, while Byzantium moved toward a more centralized and bureaucratic system. This helped shape the unique identity of the Eastern Roman Empire. Even though Byzantium carried Rome's legacy, it was evolving into something different, something entirely its own. Yes, Justinian made history through wars, conquests, and grand construction projects. But perhaps his most lasting achievement was the one written on paper, the one that has survived for centuries. But was his legacy limited to just that? No, because in Justinian's mind, there was another great project. One that would shape the very soul of Byzantium for generations to come. And what was that project, you ask? Ah, my friends, be patient. I'll tell you soon. Ah, my friends. Laws bring order to an empire, and armies protect it. But what truly makes a civilization immortal is its soul. And sometimes, that soul takes shape in stone, marble, and towering domes. Today I'll tell you about a structure that isn't just made of bricks and mortar, but one that symbolizes the very essence of an empire, the Hagia Sophia. One fateful day in the dark winter of 532, Constantinople was engulfed in flames. The Nika riots had set the city ablaze, destroying palaces, marketplaces, and even sacred sites. Among them, the old Hagia Sophia fell to the fire. As Emperor Justinian watched the smoke rise from his palace, perhaps he saw an opportunity hidden within the disaster. Yes, a rebellion had shaken the empire and the people were furious, but now was the time to prove his power, to show that he ruled by divine right. Now was the moment to build a monument that would forever embody the glory of Byzantium. Justinian summoned the greatest architects of his time, Anthemius and Isidore. He gave them a task beyond imagination, to build not just another church, but a wonder of the world. Not just a structure of stone, but a masterpiece that would shimmer like gold under the heavens. And so, my friends, the work began. Thousands of workers, artisans, and craftsmen toiled day and night. Massive columns were brought from distant lands, marble from Greece, stones from Ephesus, even materials from ancient Rome. Gold mosaics were meticulously arranged to dazzle anyone who stepped inside. And then, that dome. Ah, my friends, that dome soared into the sky like a secret whispered to the heavens. It didn't seem like something built by human hands. It floated above the city like a divine halo. It was so vast, so high, that anyone who walked inside couldn't help but tilt their head back in awe, speechless at its beauty. By the time construction was completed in 537, Justinian himself stepped through its grand doors. His eyes gleamed as he walked under that magnificent dome. He stood there for a moment, taking it all in, and then he uttered the words that would echo through history. "Solomon, I have surpassed you." In that moment, it became clear to everyone this was not just a church, it was the emperor's greatest offering to God. Hagia Sophia was not merely a place of worship, it became the very symbol of Byzantine culture. Its mosaics didn't just depict religious figures, they captured the artistic and aesthetic vision of an empire. Its walls weren't just held together by mortar, they carried the pride of a civilization. Over time, it became the heart of Byzantine religious and political life. Emperors were crowned here, rulers were blessed, and the fate of the empire was decided within its walls. For the people of Constantinople, Hagia Sophia wasn't just a church, it was God's house on earth. But my friends, as you well know, nothing lasts forever. This magnificent cathedral endured invasions, earthquakes, and the shadows of war. Yet each time it fell, it rose again, because it was more than just a building. It was the very soul of a civilization. And now I must ask you, my friends, could this grand structure and Justinian's legacy keep Byzantium standing forever? Or were there unseen dangers lurking beneath its mighty dome, waiting to shape the empire's fate? But you must be patient, for there are many more stories left to tell. My friends, civilizations don't just fall by the sword through armies or wars. Sometimes the deepest cracks form from the touch of unseen hands through the division of ideas and beliefs, East and West, the two heirs of Rome born from the same roots, yet over time they became strangers to each other. Today I'll tell you the story of an invisible war, a battle of faith, and the great schism that shook empires. The division of Rome wasn't just political. Cities started looking in different directions, cultures evolved, languages shifted, and most importantly, people began to pray in different ways. The West carried on the Latin tradition, while the East preserved the Greek spirit. Once, these two sides had worshipped the same God under the same church, but now they looked at each other with suspicion. And my friends, when it comes to faith, suspicion can be sharper than a blade. In Constantinople, the emperor was seen as God's shadow on earth. He wasn't just a ruler, he was the guardian of divine order. He protected the church, appointed patriarchs, and played a major role in religious debates. But in the West, in Rome, things were different. There, the Pope wasn't just a religious leader, he was the ultimate authority. Emperors might rise to power, but without the Pope's blessing, they were never truly legitimate. And this, my friends, was the root of the conflict. Who was the true representative of God? The emperor or the Pope? Over time, this wasn't just about power. It became a matter of faith itself. In the East, orthodoxy took shape, while in the West, Catholicism grew stronger. In the East, prayers were spoken in Greek, while in the West, Latin became the sacred language. The East embraced icons, frescoes, and golden mosaics as expressions of devotion, but the West saw them as a form of idolatry. In the East, priests could marry and have families, while in the West they took vows of celibacy, dedicating their lives fully to God. Even the way they made the sign of the cross began to differ. My friends, this divide didn't happen overnight. At first there were debates. Small theological differences became major disputes. Then politics crept in. Byzantine emperors challenged the authority of the Pope. Western kings united under the power of the Roman Church to push back against Byzantium. And finally, the day came when the split wasn't just spoken. When did it happen, you ask? When was the moment that sealed the fate of East and West forever? Let me tell you. It was the year 1054. A delegation from Rome walked into the Grand Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. They placed a letter of excommunication on the altar, condemning Patriarch Michael Sergilarius. And just like that, the last bond between the churches was severed. East and West were no longer brothers in faith, but rivals, locked in an unbridgeable divide. But my friends, did this schism only separate churches, or did it change the fate of empires as well? The answer lies in the storm that was about to crash down upon Byzantium. A threat so great it wouldn't just shake beliefs, it would shake the very land beneath their feet. And what was this great danger? Be patient, listen closely, and I will tell you. My friends, war isn't just about clashing swords and fallen fortresses. The real battle is the slow decay that eats away at an empire. Exhaustion, drained resources, endless bloodshed, and in the end, the inevitable collapse. And one of the greatest and most devastating conflicts that shaped Byzantium's fate was its life or death struggle against its ancient rival, the Sasanian Empire. This brutal fight raged for years across the scorching sands of the East, the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, and the rugged cliffs of Anatolia. Every battle only led to another, and every victory was short-lived. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, had once dreamed of reclaiming the lost lands of the West, but suddenly it had to turn its full attention eastward because the Sasanian kings never missed an opportunity to strike when Byzantium was weak. When the Byzantium was weak, this was just another chapter in an age-old rivalry. Rome and Persia had been at war for centuries, but this time the stakes were even higher. At the end of the 6th century and the beginning of the 7th, the armies of Khusro II launched a massive invasion into Byzantine territory. Antioch fell, Jerusalem was burned and looted, and even the Holy Cross itself was taken by the Persians. Ah, my friends, could there have been a greater disaster for the Byzantine people, one of the most sacred relics of the Christian world, now in the hands of Zoroastrian Persians? Fear spread like wildfire in Constantinople. People whispered that even the great capital might fall. Emperor Heraclius stood at a crossroads. The empire's treasury was empty, his soldiers were exhausted, and the people had lost hope. But could an emperor afford to surrender to despair? No, my friends. This is where Heraclius showed his true genius. He gathered the last of his resources, reorganized his army, and launched a daring counterattack right into the heart of Persia. And what a campaign it was! While the Persians ravaged Anatolia and the eastern cities, the Byzantine army crossed mountains and struck deep into Persian lands. Ah, my friends, when you bring the fight to your enemy's doorstep, it doesn't matter how powerful they are. The battle is now on their turf. The Byzantine forces crushed the Persian army in their own homeland, reclaimed the Holy Cross, and secured a decisive victory. But every victory comes at a price. This long and brutal war had drained both Byzantium and the Sasanian Empire to their core. Neither empire would ever be the same. Years of fighting had forced Byzantium to completely abandon its ambitions in the West. Italy, Africa, Spain, once the beating heart of Rome, were now left on their own. And as Byzantine influence faded, new powers began to rise. New kingdoms took shape, but the greatest threat was yet to come. One far more unstoppable than the Persians, the Goths, or any enemy before them. So, my friends, what was this new storm brewing on the horizon? A force so powerful that neither the Persians nor the Byzantines could withstand its might? That, my friends, is a story I will soon tell you. Ah, my friends, history isn't just about one era ending and another beginning. It's a saga, a tale of old ideals rising from the ashes, of power struggles lurking in the shadows, and of never-ending battles for dominance. And when the year 800 came around, something happened in the West that wasn't just a simple coronation. It was the final nail in the coffin of unity between Byzantium and the West. Once bound together under the glory of Rome, Europe was now splitting into two separate worlds. It all started with the rise of a powerful ruler in the West, Charlemagne, king of the Franks. Ah, Charlemagne, brilliant, ruthless, and yet a man of great vision. His dream? To reunite the fractured lands of Western Europe and restore the grandeur of ancient Rome. But brute force alone wasn't enough. He needed legitimacy, the kind that only Rome's emperors had once held. And the man who would give him that opportunity was none other than the spiritual leader of the West, Pope Leo III. At the time, the Pope was in a tough spot. Enemies lurked in the streets of Rome, political plots were unfolding all over Italy, and Byzantium, once a protector of the papacy, was too preoccupied with Eastern threats, Arab invasions, internal revolts, and power struggles of its own. Desperate for a strong ally, the Pope turned to Charlemagne, and so, on that fateful night, December 25th, 800, inside St. Peter's Basilica, as Charlemagne knelt before him, Pope Leo III placed a crown on his head and declared him the Emperor of the Romans. The hymns that echoed through the church that night marked the dawn of a new era in the West. But in the cold halls of Constantinople, this moment was seen as nothing less than an outrage. You see, the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Rome, considered itself the one and only true heir of Rome's legacy. To them, an emperor wasn't just a ruler, He was God's representative on earth. And only the sacred city of Constantinople had the authority to bestow such a title, not the Pope. At the time, the Byzantine ruler was Empress Irene, and she saw Charlemagne's coronation as a direct betrayal. But she was trapped in the chaos of court intrigues and political instability. With no way to march an army westward, all she could do was seethe in anger as the power dynamic of Europe changed forever, my friends. And so, the year 800 wasn't just about placing a crown on a king's head. It was about drawing an unbreakable divide between East and West. From that moment on, a new empire was born in the West. But it wasn't the Rome that Byzantium had known. The Franks would now shape their own destiny, forge their own version of Rome, while Byzantium slowly lost its last grip on Western authority, becoming a purely Eastern empire. But would this new empire truly last? Could the rising power in the West bring back Rome's lost glory? Or was this just the beginning of yet another great division? My friends, to find the answer, we must go even deeper into history. Oh, my friends, the winds of time are strong enough to tear apart even the greatest empires that once stood united. Remember, the Roman Empire was once an unbreakable force, stretching from the east to the west. But as the centuries passed, cracks in that grand unity grew wider. The old glory of Rome had faded, and its people no longer felt like they were walking the same path. And so, by the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire made a decision that perhaps was inevitable. It abandoned Latin and officially embraced Greek as its language. But my friends, this wasn't just about changing words, it was about changing identity. For centuries, Byzantium had claimed to carry the legacy of Rome. Latin was the language of the legions, the Senate, the emperors. But that old empire was gone, and new dynasties were rising in the West. For Byzantium, being part of the Latin world was no longer a necessity, it was a burden. And one morning, maybe without most people even realizing it, an empire severed its ties with the past. Emperor Heraclius, he was the man behind this great transformation. He wanted to distance Byzantium from the Latin West and focus on ruling his eastern territories more effectively. After all, most of his people didn't even speak Latin anymore. Soldiers, merchants, farmers, priests, they all thought in Greek, spoke in Greek. So why cling to an old language? And so, Latin was left to gather dust in the archives of history. From then on, official documents would be written in Greek, court proceedings would be held in Greek, and emperors would no longer call themselves Roman emperors, but instead, Basileus ton Romaion, Basileus of the Romans. But the consequences were immense. In the West, the Franks and other Latin-speaking people saw Byzantium becoming more and more foreign. Even though they had always been distant from the Eastern Empire, the name Rome still gave them a sense of connection. But now, Byzantium no longer felt like the Rome they knew. It was something else entirely, something unfamiliar. And this deepened the divide between East and West even further. Language isn't just about words, my friends. It's about identity, culture, and the way people see the world. Byzantium's shift to Greek was a clear signal. It was no longer just Rome, it was becoming a Greek empire. But did this new identity make Byzantium stronger, or did it open the door to even greater threats? Well, my friends, to find out, we must continue our journey. My friends, as time goes on, every great empire must reshape itself. Old ways become outdated and new solutions are needed to defend borders, govern the people, and deal with enemies. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call Byzantium, was no exception. It claimed to be the true heir of Rome, but what was really left of the old empire? The legions were gone, emperors faced new and deadly threats, and the West had drifted away. So how would Byzantium defend itself? How would it survive? The answer was a radical new system, the theme system. Now close your eyes and imagine the empire like a vast map. In the old days, Roman legions were stationed in different provinces, ready to respond to threats. But those massive legions no longer existed. Instead, each region had to sustain its own army, defend its own land. And so the Byzantines reorganized their territories into themes, each governed by a military governor called a strategos. The imperial army was no longer a single, centralized force. It became a network of regional military units. This made defense far more flexible. Instead of waiting for reinforcements from the capital, each theme could raise and train its own troops using local resources. But this wasn't just a military reform, my friends. It was a whole new way of running an empire. In the West, feudal lords carved up the land and ruled their own mini-kingdoms. But in Byzantium, the emperor still owned all the land. While Western kings relied on powerful nobles, the Byzantine emperor remained at the top, unchallenged. Under the theme system, a farmer wasn't just a farmer, he was also a soldier. In exchange for land, he was expected to fight for the empire when needed. This reform became one of the key reasons Byzantium managed to survive for centuries. But think about it. Could this system really protect Byzantium forever? Would these regional governors one day grow too powerful and challenge the emperor? And when the greatest enemies in history arrived at Byzantium's gates, would this system be enough to hold the empire together? Well, my friends, only time would tell. Ah, my friends, history isn't just shaped by swords clashing on the battlefield. It's often decided by the power of words and belief. And when it comes to Byzantium, its greatest legacy wasn't its mighty walls, golden domes, or conquered lands. No, its true legacy was something far deeper, a faith, a culture, and a language that would leave a lasting mark on the world. That's why instead of getting entangled in the political chaos of Western Europe, the Eastern Roman Empire turned its gaze eastward, toward the Slavic peoples. And this shift would give birth to a legacy far greater than any empire. Back then, to the north, across vast forests and icy rivers, the Slavs lived. They were a collection of tribes caught between a nomadic and settled way of life. They had no great cities, no written language. But to the Byzantines, their true importance wasn't in their lands or numbers. It was in their souls. Christianity was the foundation of Byzantine power, and the emperors believed that spreading the faith would strengthen the empire's destiny. So, from the heart of Constantinople, two brothers set out on a mission to bring faith to the Slavic world. Saint Cyril and Saint Methodius. These two men started by learning the Slavic languages. But there was a major problem. The Slavs had no alphabet, no way to read the scriptures or understand the prayers of the church. So Cyril and Methodius, driven by their mission, created a brand new writing system inspired by Greek and Latin letters, but tailored to the sounds of the Slavic tongue. This system, which we now know as the Cyrillic alphabet, became one of the most powerful tools in shaping Slavic identity. But my friends, this was about more than just an alphabet. This was a cultural and religious bridge, one that expanded Byzantium's influence far beyond its borders. Byzantine missionaries built churches across Slavic lands, baptized new believers, and embedded Orthodox Christianity deep within their hearts. Unlike the Latin West, which spread Catholicism, Byzantium established a powerful spiritual and cultural presence in Eastern Europe. Centuries later, the fruits of this mission would be seen from Russia to Bulgaria, where Orthodox Christianity flourished. But here's the question, my friends. Did Byzantium gain new allies through this bold move, or did it create new enemies within its own ranks? How did the Pope in Rome react to this growing Orthodox influence? And did this moment drive an even deeper wedge between Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Catholicism? Once again, history brings us to the edge of a great turning point. Ah, my friends, history isn't always shaped by great battles. Sometimes it's the silent cracks that slowly deepen over time. And in the year 1054, one of those cracks would finally split the Christian world in two, never to be repaired. This wasn't a sudden break caused by a single war or decree. No, it was the result of centuries of resentment, differences, and power struggles finally reaching a boiling point. The Great Schism was here, the moment when Christianity was torn apart, leaving two great churches standing on opposite sides: the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Orthodox Church in the East. But to truly understand this split, we need to pull back the veil of time. It all began with the fall of Rome. As the Western Empire crumbled under barbarian invasions and civil war, the Eastern Roman Empire kept the imperial tradition alive. In the West, the Pope gradually became more than just a religious leader. He became a political figure, ruling over lands and kings. But in the East, it was the emperor who held authority over the church, working closely with the patriarchs to maintain both spiritual and worldly order. Over time, these two different systems drifted further apart, creating a divide that would prove impossible to bridge. Language was another source of division. In the West, Latin was sacred, the language of prayers, hymns, and scripture. But in the East, Greek dominated, and the Byzantines were far more open to allowing different peoples to worship in their own languages. Yet, my friends, at the heart of this conflict was power. The Pope claimed he was the supreme authority over all of Christianity, but the Byzantine Emperor and the Patriarch of Constantinople rejected this idea, insisting that after Rome's fall, the true center of Christianity was now in the East. For years, these disagreements played out in small disputes, theological debates, and diplomatic tensions. But by 1054, things had reached the breaking point. That year, Cardinal Humbert arrived in Constantinople as an envoy from Rome. His mission was clear: force the Byzantine Patriarch, Michael Cerularius, to recognize the Pope's authority. But things didn't go as planned. The Patriarch and his court were outraged by the arrogance of the Western delegation. Talks collapsed, tensions soared, and finally, Anya stormed into Hagia Sophia, walked up to the altar, and placed a bull of excommunication against the Patriarch himself. But my friends, do you think the Byzantines would let this insult go unanswered? Of course not. Caelarius immediately excommunicated the Pope in return. And just like that, after 1,000 years of unity, Christianity was split in two. The West now had the Catholics, and the East had the Orthodox. And this wasn't just a theological divide, it was a political and cultural rupture that would shape the future of Europe and the Byzantine world. But let me ask you, my friends, was this just a religious dispute, or would it lead to something far worse? Would the growing hostility between East and West eventually bring them to war? And with the Crusades looming on the horizon, what terrible fate awaited Byzantium in the years to come? History still has many twists and turns ahead. My friends, history isn't always written on the battlefield. Sometimes it's shaped by betrayal, greed, and deception. And what happened in 1204 is exactly one of those stories. The centuries-long struggle between Byzantium and the Latin world reached a point where the ties between the East and the West were torn beyond repair. But how did it happen that the Crusaders, who set out with a holy mission, turned their sights from Jerusalem to attack one of the greatest cities in the Christian world, Constantinople? Let me take you back to those dark days. It all started with Pope Innocent III's call for a new crusade. The Fourth Crusade was supposedly organized to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslims. But from the very beginning, the course of the crusade was shaped by money and politics. The Crusaders turned to Venice for help financing their campaign. However, this assistance from Venetian Doge Enrico Dandolo wasn't without strings attached. The Venetians got the Crusaders into debt first, and then persuaded them to change the focus of the crusade, directing them toward their own interests instead of Jerusalem. The first step of the plan was for the Crusaders to capture a city called Zara. But this wasn't a Muslim city. It was part of the Catholic Kingdom of Hungary. The Pope condemned this attack on fellow Christians, but the Crusaders' greed blinded them to everything else. And this is when Byzantium's internal struggles came into play. Alexios, the son of the deposed Emperor Isaac II, turned to the Crusaders and offered them a generous deal. If they helped him regain the throne, he'd pay them huge sums of money from the Byzantine treasury and force the Orthodox Church to recognize the Pope's authority. So the Crusaders decided to fight not the Muslims, but their fellow Christians. In 1203, the Crusaders and Venetians arrived with a massive fleet at the walls of Constantinople. The city was shaken by the initial assault, and the people were in a panic. The Crusaders put Alexios on the throne, but the people of Byzantium never saw him as a savior. When the new emperor failed to fulfill his promises to the Crusaders, riots broke out, and Alexios was killed. His successor, Emperor Alexios V, tried to resist the Crusaders, but it was too late. In April of 1204, the Crusaders breached the walls of Constantinople and carried out one of history's greatest plunders. For 3 days, the city was torn apart. Churches were looted, holy relics were stolen, and monasteries were burned. The marble floors of Hagia Sophia were trampled by soldiers' boots. Gold icons were melted down, and mosaics were ripped off. Women, monks, the elderly, no one escaped this brutality. The Venetians and Crusaders stole Byzantium's treasures, its sacred objects, and its history that had been accumulated over 1,000 years. The Pope condemned the plunder, but by then it was already too late. And so the Byzantine Empire fell. The Crusaders established the Latin Empire in Constantinople, but this state never amounted to more than a shadow of an empire. Byzantine nobles fled to Anatolia and Greece, setting up small kingdoms to continue the fight. But my friends, the real question was, could Byzantium ever rise again after this disaster? Or was this once mighty empire which had ruled the world now destined to fade into the dusty pages of history? That's another story altogether.